Hi, I'm David Dunlop. Welcome to my studio. And I'm going to take you back on color and design to 3200 BCE. So, here we go. And we're going back to this Celtic architecture over 5,000 years ago. And what we've got is the door. You'll notice it's rectilinear. It's a rectangle, and the rocks are stacked up rectangles. And it's all T-shapes. It's all little T-shapes. As the architect Graves will tell you, in architecture, it's all about the tension between the horizontal and the vertical. And if I leap forward, I have these pre-attentive symbols. There's the spiral, the circle, the door, the portal, and the architecture of the rectangles. And I'm going to leap forward to 1914, just past Cubism. You would have had to have seen Cubism for Mondrian to be able to do this. And what he's done is he's got the same portal, the portal, the portal, the arched portal, because of course his cultural relationships tell him that arches go over doors. And from there we can see the rectangles built up, all smaller than the door, all smaller than the door. And then they build up with complementary colors and equal values. So the values are very close, but the colors are complementary, creating a nice, soft hum of harmony. And what is happening is that all those sharp edges, the focus on those edges diminishes as it goes out to the corners. And we get this oculus, this ellipse, where things start to blur to the edges. That's how our vision works. And he's conscious of how our vision works. He'd seen Braque do it. He'd seen Picasso do it. And now he's doing it. He's aware of how color degrades in the periphery. So color is more intense in the center of our vision. That's where our cones see color, in the center of our vision. And our color diminishes as we go to our rods, which are on the periphery of our vision. So we got 7,000 cones and 7 million cones and 125 million rods. Now this idea of color and its relationship to the pattern gets explored in so many ways. And here's Paul Klee, a few years later, doing the same thing, taking the idea of rectilinear patterns. He's been looking at children's drawings because he likes the kind of uninhibited, natural, primal experience that he finds in children's drawings. He collects them, and he collects their use of color because it's symbolic and cultural. Just like Van Gogh would do the same thing, collecting bits of yarn to see that intense color. So as he's looking at those colors, he's doing something that design schools will talk about as Chromo Stereopsis, and that is, there are certain colors, red and blue, or red and green, when you put them next to one another, at their edge, they create such a vibration, it's hard to locate where the edge is. In fact, if you're trying to put type in red type or green type on a field of blue or vice versa, it creates such a vibration, hence the name Chromo Stereopsis, that we have a hard time locating it. Our where part of our brain and our what part of our brain, those are different tracks in the cortex. So here he's got it. You can see this red against this blue-green, this red against this blue-green. They separate. And what's happening in this separation is that some elements seem to advance and some elements seem to recede, especially when they're most complementary against one another or most complementary in terms of value, light, dark, or complementary in color, blue, green, and red, orange. That gives his grid, his design, space that moves in and out this way, not simply space that moves left to right, up to down, and around. It's moving in all those directions. Now let's see how else we can borrow other sources, other cultural sources, not just young children. We'll go back in time again, this time hundreds of years back to the Yuan dynasty, to Hongguang Wang, whose name I'm sure I'm butchering in Mandarin. And I want you to notice he's using a serpentine pattern. He goes from something to nothing, something, the mountain slope, to nothing, to mountain, and look how precipitous it is. Very vertiginous. Artists like Wayne Thiebaud are going to look at these pictures and get ideas for organizing their cityscapes. So if you look at Wayne Thiebaud's vertical views and exaggerated vertical views and flattened views of San Francisco, you're going to say, this must have been a source. Other cultural sources, just as Picasso goes to the Trocadero Museum looking for something to reinvigorate Western traditions in art. And he sees those African masks, and they end up in the Demoiselles d'Avignon. And he starts borrowing the colors. You'll notice that the Demoiselles d'Avignon, those colors, the Lady of Avignon, those colors, the prostitutes, are borrowed just as Mondrian has them here. These soft pinks. It's ironic because it's that flesh color. Well, here, so the colors have meaning. They have a cultural code. And here, if we take these principles of design, these very humped mountains, very vertical, and we superimpose them, as Marguerite Zorak, an expressionist, does in 1930 in Maine. She takes those mountains, puts them in Maine, takes iconic trees, just as we find over here, these iconic trees in the Paul Klee, exaggerates them. We have a serpentine motion as we enter down here and we wiggle around. The water is darker blue, the sky is a blue because that's the code, that's the color for the sky. And the mountains are a reference to these Chinese mountains. Now, if you know that, all of a sudden this picture becomes richer. How do we organize pictures with color and perspective? It goes back a long way. Now, linear perspective will take us back in time to, let's say, 1436. Leon Battista Alberti writes this book, Della Pittura. And he's writing out the principles of linear perspective as he learned them from Brunelleschi. And it's the first time it's put in a book. And Paolo Uccello gets the book. And he's becoming acquainted, just like Masaccio at the same time, with how to use this linear perspective. And so that all of these broken staffs all converge to a single eye level, single point of disappearance, as he called it, or what we call the vanishing point. Here. Now, he's using the vanishing point and these lines. It almost seems ridiculous that these staffs would line up in perfect order in a battle. But it helped him develop space with this new system, as well as the idea of the big horse to the littler horses in back. And the big horse is what color? White. That means it's the virtuous horse. These are the virtuous Florentines and the victorious Florentines in the Battle of San Romano. And who's the good guy is he wearing? Who's the wealthy, important potentate? It's the king, the royal one, wearing the red hat. The red hat with the gold and the embroidery and all the finery, and the horse with all that nice gold, and the white. We know that's the good one, and the white and the blue flag. Hooray, hooray for the good guys who are going to be victorious in commission. Uccello to do the picture. So back in here we have this other nice V, and this V shows us the biomorphic, these serpentine shapes. This serpentine shape that if I look at about the same time, just 100 years later, in this Persian, this Iranian piece of this picture of a wedding feast, a royal wedding. And that we've got here the royal couple, and you see the flanks of the walls. Just as we see the flanks of Uccello's painting going in, we see the flanks of the walls hold like a stage set directing us to the protagonists. And what are they wearing? That royal red, that same royal red, and gold and lapis lazuli must be very important. We would take those colors and we would put the lapis lazuli and the rich vermilion, the red, onto the Madonna, onto popes and cardinals, onto anybody who's important, and then through the rectangle, through the portal. Remember the portal that we saw more than 5,000 years ago? Through the portal, what do we see? We see nature's mystery and soft biomorphic serpentine shapes that all are happening behind the window, outside of the organized space here. Let's go back to 1436, and that was the book of Della Pittura, Leon Battista Alberti, and it's now 1480. And here is somebody, Pinturicchio, who's figuring out how to take those lines and make linear perspective. You see how these are at equal units, these radians, this line, and they all converge to a vanishing point inside the door, through the portal, Out we go. And then the symbols, the dead person in gray and a black, mourning for the coffin, and the virtuous ones, the nuns, the sisters are wearing the virginal white, chaste and pure. And the wealthy merchant who's paying for the whole show, is wearing the red, of course. And the poor friars are wearing the brown, of course, because it's cheap and they're not worthy of wearing red or blue. And the sky is the celestial blue of the cosmos. It's where heaven is. It's the dome of heaven. It's blue. Just like Marguerite Zorak's blue here. So the colors are coded. And if we go and we take this idea of the flanking shapes, we can take them as trees, we can take them as buildings, and as trees, we take them through the 16th and the 17th century and the 18th century until we're at the end of the 19th century. And there is Cézanne. And we have there back again is the arch. Mondrian's arch. Through the portal we go. And little reflecting planes of light in complementary colors. Greens versus reds, dark greens versus reds, and ochre yellows versus blue. And we have these this pileup of these reflecting planes of complementary color and value are going to inspire the idea of cubism and rearranging pictures completely and move us into abstraction. And it comes out of this tradition. Just descends like father to son, mother to child. Let's see what happens next with taking some of these ideas, the Chinese ideas and the colors, and I'm going to show you that here. Main landscape, just like Marguerite Zorak, only this is an oil on paper and this is a watercolor on paper with an oil glaze. They're both glazed. There's the photograph. I squished it. Here's the serpentine. There are two types of blue. Each one gives you a different feeling. This is the jewel blue of the sapphire and the lapis lazuli. It's deeper and richer and has a meaning that is different than this blue. It has a different color temperature. It has more red in it. This has more green in it. And if I'm going to have this color, you're going to get a different psychological feeling and temperature from this, and meaning from this and this, even though the designs are very similar. You can see how I've exaggerated the design. And we shift through this blue-green into a soft pink atmosphere. Back from into something to nothing, just like the Chinese, into the sacred mountain in the distance, just as Cézanne would do with Mont Saint-Victoire, the sacred mountain in the distance. I'm going to take these down and take you back through some color design history. And we'll go to right here. This chromatic triangle tells us something about organizing color that's going to radically reorient artists in the 19th century. You and I are used to seeing the standard color wheel, the circle. And that had been developed by Newton, that early color circle. And then other artists and other color scientists would carry it further until finally, in the first part of the 19th century, very sophisticated color wheels by Chevreul, for example. And Chevreul's going to take the notice, as Newton did when he took the spectrum and turned it into a circle, that the yellow, opposite the yellow, when he turned it into the spectrum, has a dark indigo violet. So the yellow and the indigo violet are opposite on the color wheel, just like a blue-green. A blue-green is opposite a red-orange. But that's not necessarily a useful tool for artists, except for matching complementary colors. Suppose you want to get how much complementary color do I need to how much of the value of another color do I need. And that's where the physicist Ogden Rood at Columbia University comes up with his new modern chromatics book. And it's toward the end of the 19th century, and everyone from Gauguin to Vincent van Gogh and others are all going to get a hold of that book, and it's going to change painting. It's also going to insult Ogden Rood, because he's going to say, if I had known these paintings are going to come from my theories, I would never have proposed the theories. But he was a scientist, and as he came up with, he said, look, how much ultramarine, how much deep blue do I have to have a color balance with yellow? I only need a little bit of yellow to compensate, to get balance with how much blue. A lot of blue, a little bit of yellow. A lot of yellow-green, the green is bigger than the yellow. And the yellow and the orange goes yellow, yellow-orange, red-orange, into this magenta. And this territory is so big, and this brighter territory is small. The darker territory is bigger, the lighter territory is smaller. So you know to use more of this and less of this if you want color balance. And that's what's going to inspire all of those artists and change the way the 19th century into the 20th century is going to paint. Cézanne knew about this, and it's going to change the way he paints. So this, and here they are the colors that I used to make this: ultramarine blue, a cyan blue, and a light vermilion, a carmine red. And these colors, azurite, ultramarine, vermilion, or carmine and vermilion, and then a gamboge yellow, and then a lighter yellow, which wouldn't be available until the 19th century with chrome yellow. The closest anybody could get. If you were Vermeer, you'd be using lead tin yellow or orpiment. But if you were Vermeer, you'd be doing something else too. This deep ultramarine blue would be the color that you would put for your shadows. This would be the color that you would use to deepen the Persian carpets. These colors, right here mixed with white, would give us the loaves of bread and the golden touch, and then glaze them with this blue to get the bread in the shadow. Let's see what we can do with some more design and color and see how they work in my own paintings. Now, color is richer when it is on a more reflective surface. And that's the discovery that many artists, from Turner to Vermeer to Rembrandt to Velázquez, all made. Even Da Vinci made that discovery as well. If I have a lighter surface underneath and a more translucent color on top, I'm going to get the color as it passes the light, as it passes the photons of light, as they pass through the color film and bounce off that substrate, that reflective substrate, I'm going to get a color that is richer and stronger. Now, I just have to integrate the color and the symbolism and the locations and the sizes and shapes with a design. In this case, here I am out at the Rye marshlands near me, and I'm going to borrow a design just as we have seen everybody else borrowing the history of design. If I go to look at Dutch landscapes, I can see a distant visual goal, maybe a little bit of water on the left. And I'll notice that Cézanne uses that same principle. His water, in the picture I just showed you, tended to be on a triangle to the left with his village over here. He just had a higher horizon. I've shrunk the trees to barely being bumps. I'm using a triangle here. But we've got these complementary color relationships just as Cézanne had in his picture. It's the same palette. The design is different. It's more liquid. The design is the serpentine design. So we're coming in and taking a serpentine meander, that S shape, to go back into this space. And that S shape is doing what that Paul Klee illustration did. Let me put some opposite or complementary bits of color to pop up through this fabric, through this texture, this serpentine texture. And it will bring it to life. It will snap it into our attention. And then I will amalgamate the color as I go back. So here we have disparate elements organized inside of the pattern, complementary colors of different levels of brightness, moving back into a more amalgamated color. And look what happens. The red desaturates and gets to a whiter yellow as we get back, until finally the color is quite desaturated over here, only to be reflected again and picked up in a luminous sky with these pink clouds. Again, the blue sky. Now, the color and the design and the symbolism and the values make a difference. If I take a deep blue, that lapis lazuli blue, that ultramarine blue that we saw with the Persians, what am I going to get? There's the wings of the little palace where we're getting everybody to be married. The couple is getting married inside of this space. I've got the red and the yellow, the gold, and the figures. And I go into the figures, into the window on space. But my window on space is something that was developed in the 17th century by people like Claude, and that is atmospheric perspective, a soft, gauzy atmosphere. And here's the soft, gauzy atmosphere. There's the window. The figures lose their acuity. They take a pattern, that triangular pattern, and a serpentine pattern. They're commingled. Now let's try something like this ourselves and see what happens. And just before I do, I want you to see how it can play out in different relationships of sky to earth and those colors, the lapis lazuli and the gold. We don't have to have any figures at all, and yet we can still feel the value of the color, that associative, culturally associative sense of value that we've inherited over centuries, over thousands of years. And I'll do it here. Over here, I have the gold, and this is a brushed gold anodized aluminum. That's the substrate. Now, depending on your angle of incidence, it will reflect light. So if the camera holds still and I move it, you may see that the light reflection changes, and you will see how reflective it is. Because you have parallax vision, 2 eyes, I'm assuming you're seeing some of that reflection. At least I'm hoping you are. As you move around a picture, as your eyes go through their little foveal saccades, they're changing the angle. And as you change the angle, the picture has a stronger sense of stereopsis. And that's because of the reflective substrate. Now, I don't have to have the gold underneath, but that gold and its reflectivity, not only does it impart a sense of value, as it has whether or not we were doing those Book of Hours in the medieval manuscripts, or whether or not we're doing the Persian miniatures, or whether or not we're doing this. That gold imparts a sense of value, but it also animates the surface because of its reflectance. It shimmers, and therefore it makes the surface appear to move. Over here, I don't have the gold, I have the white. And the white isn't white, it's pink. And it's pink against, it's a light pink against a varied blue. And there's that azure blue, that azurite blue, and the ultramarine blue, that's the lapis lazuli blue. And we can see here in the shadows those blues, because in the shadows colors move, they migrate to an indigo violet. As they migrate into the light to yellow, orange, and white. And so I can take the design ideas of the triangles, the linear perspective, bigger to smaller, the orthogonals, and I can have a little more fun than Pinturicchio did, or perhaps in a different way, by taking different vanishing points, a lot of different vanishing points, as I have angles that are shifting and changing, even though they're going to the same eye level. That's two-point perspective. The San Romano battle of Uccello, that was single-point perspective. The colors, they're no figures, but we feel the sunlight, we feel the golden light of Amun-Ra and the sun here, and we feel the jeweled shadows of the sapphire. All of these are ways of imparting an associative emotional value into the structure of the picture. And of course, there's the pattern. You notice the pattern goes from this small little bit of sunlight, and look, it's pitched at an angle, so we have this serpentine. There's that serpent. Back to Chinese painting, back to the Garden of Eden, back to the Egyptian Osiris myth, and the intervals. So I go bigger here, fatter here, thinner to thinner. So everything seems to recede in space using complementary color and a soft blurry edge. And a soft blurry edge, as Vermeer and Da Vinci both discovered, gives you volume, gives you halation, gives you a corona. All right, let's try some painting. And let me show you how I go about the idea of painting. I'm going to go to this top picture. I took a horizontal picture and I squeezed it, I pinched it. I came in on it like this. So the picture is pinched. Now here's the interesting design. There's the piazza going back. That's this triangle. And here's another triangle, and another one, and another one, and of course that's the W design. But for balance, you don't want it to be the same, so you want one is taller, and one is shorter. So we'll go one to here, one to there. So we've got an asymmetrical, I flipped it, but the idea is there. And I did it in black and white because black and white offers me something as an artist. It offers me the chance to invent color. I can try for an analogous harmony, I can superimpose colors that aren't present, as Van Gogh does, because I see this in black and white and I'm liberated from the colors that the camera first exposed me to, which I have changed, as you can see here and here. And when I want a greater sense of motion, and color does not lie sharp within a shape, it's blurry within a shape. And so here I am blurring the shapes even more by doing a lateral motion with the picture. Same picture, lateral motion, more blue, less yellow-green, and it brings up that lapis lazuli and gives us a stronger sense of contrast and a different sense of cultural and aesthetic value. The design of the V and the design of the V with the colors and the complements can be worked out, and whether it's train tracks or whether or not it's another picture like this with full of triangles and full of possibilities for multiple points of perspective. Or I can go back to the ideas of Paul Klee and Mondrian and George Braque and Picasso. And if I'm walking through Midtown Manhattan, as I was, I can take my color picture, convert it to black and white. I can then take my color picture and let you see it in color, squeeze it, stretch it. What I'm interested in is this cluster of jewels like a diamond necklace on a dark blouse or shirt. And that cluster draws my attention. I'm always drawn attention to the light areas. And the dark areas act to frame. That's going back to the Pinturicchio, that's going back to the Cézanne, that's going back to the Persian piece, that's going back to the Uccello. And I can see if I change that horizon, I might change the dynamic. So if I lower the horizon here and crop off figures, I'm going to invent anyway. If I move this light spot a little to the left or a little to the right, because I'm making this area a little larger, if I make the jewels too large, they won't sparkle. They depend upon a large territory of dark around them. This shows me lots of possibilities. Let's see how I might design it, how I might distill it, reduce it into something that's more digestible and easier to improvise with, because improvisation is key. You have to be so comfortable with what you're doing that you can improvise. You're not interested in transcription, you're not interested in copying, you're interested in a psychological effect. And the psychological effect depends upon how confident you are, how relaxed you are, how much access you have to stored memory so that you can invent. And that means doing a variety of sketches. So if I pick this low horizon, I'm going to do something to make it move. I'm going to have it turn with multiple point perspective. I have these buildings, this wing, and they're going down because there's my eye level back in here, eye level, EL. And then they're going back, and they're going back into this space. So I've got a lot of verticals and some horizontals. And the horizontals tell me it's a horizontal plane, vertical plane, and now it's the dark light condition. Dark frame to the outside. Don't make them the same size. Let's let this dark be bigger. Let's let this dark be smaller. Let's keep some dark light popping here. Let's do a little soft triangle here. I've got a very vertiginous triangle there. That's where that is. And a very shallow one here. So down here it's shallow, up here it's steep. And it's quite a bit out of the middle. My sense of motion is triggered in my brain when I see the blurry figures. And then do I follow that light to a yellow and red? Does that give me the indication of neon, of excitement, of electricity? Do I have those associations in the 20th and 21st century, where I can think of the color of electric light? Our associations with color change with our context. And so now I have a yellow vehicle. tells me cab. It doesn't tell me that, oh, that's yellow, that means gold, that's a golden vehicle, that must be where the emperor rides. That might have been the idea centuries ago, but today, it's where I'm lucky to get a ride in the rain. And I'm going to do everything else to reinforce moving into this space. And then figures give me a sense of scale. And I can, if I have dark figures on a light ground, they will move out of it. Just as if I have light figures on a dark ground, they will move out of it. Light figures are moving out of this ground, and the darker figures. And then the arrangement of the figures tells me their eye level. I'm going to keep their eye level, their heads all the same. Tells me how to get back and through this space. So they are not in a procession as they were in the Battle of San Romano or in the funeral of San Bernardino in the Pinturicchio, where I know the hierarchy of people in the procession and can say, well, the ones in the center are most important, or the ones in the red are most important, or in Egyptian pictographs, the ones that are biggest are most important. Mine are just scattered about with a sort of democratic equanimity. Now we're going to take that idea and move to a painting. And I'm going to put you up here. Now we've done a design, so I'm not going to have to replicate that with you. And I've got a piece of aluminum with acrylic white plastered on top. I'll squeeze out some color, and we'll get started to see how the symbols of color, the nature of the design, the light and dark relationships can all happen. And it'll have to be fairly quick, because I've blathered on about color and design. And so let's take the colors. An ultramarine blue, which I've been talking about, and you've been seeing in all those paintings. And that golden color, the gamboge. And white, if I want to make an atmospheric perspective and make a color into a pastel. Remember, if I mix the colors, I degrade the color. I get less reflectance back to the eye. And that azurite can come in the scavening blue light of Old Holland, or it can also come in an azure blue, which is transparent. So that's opaque. This is transparent. And that's what you saw when I showed you the colors of the rocks in the water. There. See how translucent? Watch. See how opaque? Another yellow. If I want something that's a little more lemony, which makes a beautiful green if I needed it. And some carmine and some vermilion. There's the carmine. There's the vermilion. Leaping out of the tube in a nice Romanesque arch. And the design, which you saw me do. So we're going to take some refined linseed oil, some paper towels down here. Take this rather small brush. And if I'm going to use different tools to manipulate the paint, maybe a little bit of oil. That's just refined linseed oil. There's no terp involved. So we can see that rich lapis lazuli experience here. And I'm going to keep, all right, we're coming in from this side. And we'll move you. Remember, I want you to stay. Let me move this over here a little bit so I don't block your view. Better. This gives a place for my body to stand and you to see the picture. I'll put that carmine in. And that dark recedes more than, see how the blue moves forward and the darker it is, the more it punches a hole into this. And as I lower it, I lower the horizon. Or over here, if I do this, the frame is stronger. Now the frame is stronger, so the space is deeper. The higher contrast of darks on the edges, the curtains to the stage, help make this space go back further. And that was an idea, even if we looked at the Uccello, you'd start to see that again with San Romano. Now I'm taking a lighter brush, and I'm going to try some lighter colors. I'm going to take some of this vermilion light. And just for the fun of it, we'll wipe down, because if I mix those two colors together, it'll just get the red and the blue together, gets this brownish purple, because this is so opaque. It gets a much better purple if I take the carmine, which is more transparent. See how much richer and more jewel-like and how much browner, because this is absorbing more light and this is reflecting more light. Now there I'm setting up the conditions for Chromo Stereopsis of these two opposite colors, creating a vibration. And now we'll try some yellows. And they'd be yellow oranges. So I'm going to take the red that was in this brush, wipe it off with linseed oil, and go back to borrow some of this gamboge. And I'm going to try to hear the music of the city. Now, without putting edges in, we can still hypothesize that this has this reflectance popping out, and that this might be in relationship to, you can see into it because you do that. You see a pattern that has some correlation with the previous experience, this picture, and you can pick it up out of this. That's one of the things we human beings do. We're fairly skilled at. Pattern recognition. And that can work with the color as well as with the shapes. They work in concert together. When I take out the color, that's now the brightest spot. That was the brightest spot. Once I've done that, I've prioritized your looking to that. Now I'm going to build a bit of darks and lights scattered about here. And some textures. Let's try some textures, because that will thin the color and make it more luminous. The light underneath is reflecting through the color as I make the color thinner. So in other words, the yellow is yellower as it gets thinner. Or the blue becomes bluer or more purple, depending on, as you can see, once it's thinner. And this texturing is more ambiguous as a territory, and therefore it'll be easier to guess into. Now I'm going to do my off-center. And the swoosh of the street taking its turn. That's the sound of the swoosh of the street. The smaller the light area, the brighter the sparkles. Now I'm doing these little vertical lines. We attend to these vertical lines because that's the way we're built. We have different neurons in our cortex that are designed to see an edge that is banked at 40 degrees. I mean, Wiesel and Hubble, back in 1959 at Harvard, that was their Nobel Prize-winning discovery, is that animals, that we have little neurons in our brain that just pick up a slight angle, a slight turn, just as they pick up a slight color. So how we correlate those in the brain is how we, in fact, create an image. Now I'm going to do, having done that, I'm going to go to a squeegee and see about finding different kinds, and go to several kinds of squeegees, different size squeegees. Bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller. So if I go to U and I can create textures again that will suggest, and I will space, moving in and out and around. Patterns, just patterns. We're pattern recognizers, and as a painter you want to exploit the fact that you and I recognize patterns. With a little linear perspective, in other words, if I bevel that to go in, or out, or in and out, or come down in here, back to those little shapes that are the downtown lights as we head toward Times Square. Off we go, and I'll subdue some of this, make them lighter and darker by what I brush over, down into that space. These are the wings in that Persian palace where the wedding was taking place here. And what a fine wedding it was. From the Book of Kings. That little Persian painting, by the way, they used gold and silver and opaque watercolor on the paper. Because if you use those materials, you'll also impart that sense of value. Now, to create a sense of radiation, as you see me doing here, I create these vibrations of light and dark and horizontal tension, and horizontal and vertical tensions. I can even take a piece and have it change its, and just have some, you can see it has a three-dimensional aspect if I do something like this. I'm trying to continue to respect the frame. And one of the ways to do that, and if I overlay it, I get a grid that causes a little visual confusion. And you can see as the colors get lighter, they also get a little richer there too. Now I'm going to do a little blending of that color with a soft brush. Like this. That subdues some of that color, and blurs the edges, which makes me spend even more time here because that has become richer as a consequence. Now let's take another big brush. Oh, great and powerful big brush. Where are you? Good, thank you. This is a 4-inch brush. And I'm going to do that idea of some figure activity. Ghostly figures arranged in patterns around here. Turning turning shapes. Just suggest, don't need to tell. Don't make the figures too tall, David. The shorter the figures are, the grander the scale is. Here, I'll show you. Let's make them short. A bunch, whole crowd in here. Shorter figures tell you it's a bigger situation. Now, I'm not applied any opaque lights at this point. I will. As I go to create visual noise with these bits of light, these sparkling bits of light, these complementary color relationships, yellow and purple and red and this blue, green, blue. And a little tap tap here. For more ambiguity back in there, build that space. Now, the whiter I get this, the more snap there is with the rest of this picture. So let's try it. Let's take a bigger brush that is capable of a big streak of white very fast. Put a little oil on it. And since there's a yellow-orange in here, I'll go to this carmine and get a little more of a pinky violet tone, which is more complementary than a pure white, to create that vibration. And so here we go. Now you'll notice I'm diving way deeper with my cut. So that I can experience that space through the contrast. Now, if I remember my color code system well, and I can also come back and come up to the top, or even put it in atmospheric perspective at the top. So the top feels like it's lost in a bit of a cloudy atmosphere. There. All of these are improvisations that occur to you as you're going, in a most merry way. And if I take a smaller brush, a 2-inch brush, and go back to this complementary color for these, very light, pull the white color away. Look at those beautiful textures that the oil has made with the ultramarine blue as it degrades. And those textures I have used in many a painting. Turn them upside down and they look like a forest of small trees. Yeah. If you were to just invert that. All right, so now we're picking up, there's the complementary color. What happens if it gets deeper and richer and deeper and richer? Let's try it, getting deeper and richer up here. Deeper and richer, deeper and richer. Oops. Hello, what are you doing on there? So that I can have a slow transition of value. See this slow transition of value? Let's make it a little slower. That is a little more abrupt than I wanted it. There, that's a slower. And that makes me go from dark to light, complementary color relationships, into this light down here. Now I could get an atmospheric perspective down in here with more glow. And that can be done like this. A very dry brush, touching very, I'm going to wipe it off on my rag and just see what happens as I start to apply color. You've only seen me delete the color. so I can get atmospheric perspective of all those lights and that activity down in this milky light. They're blurring and bleeding all over themselves with light. Spill, spill, spill. See that blur, that mix of confused light? That gives it more motion. When those edges are more dissolved like this with these colors, I have a stronger sense of that motion. And I'll put more light right at that edge, right at that edge. Now I'll superimpose a bit so I can get some more music going. The music of the city on Broadway, where one thin dime won't even shine your shoes. Right now in my head I have everything from Alicia Keys' New York to Liza Minnelli. Blur, 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 blur. Gray the color down. Grading the color down makes it go back. Now I've 2 inch, 1 inch. Whisk. Very light. Keep the music going in your head. Keeps you relaxed. The imperial fleet of taxis that I was talking about earlier. If you were a Roman emperor and you just walked onto the streets of New York, you'd have said, I want one of the yellow golden cabs. And you would also be saying, where are their horses? And they would say they're under the roof. And the emperor would be very perplexed. And if he comes in 10 years from now, he would say, why are there no drivers in these cars? Because we've progressed to driverless cars, even in a context like this. Now you see that glow, the city, okay, what fun. Now we'll just try again some other bits of information over here. And now let's go to the light blue back again, a little bigger brush, and see what happens as we lift the light out in here and see what can happen as we lift, let it reflect this street and get that mirror. Now that's opaque paint. Got to put the YMCA sign up. Or the theater marquees. Everyone tells me to go see Hamilton right now. And a little bit of that soft, right? When I'm down here in these pinks, I can put a blue-gray. If I put the blue-gray up here, I won't notice that it's doing anything. And now even smaller bits of light, bright bits of light. Little vertical touches, just swap, swap, swap. An interesting story of Pissarro and Cézanne. When they were painting next to one another, the farmer said, I could tell who was painting what because I could hear slap, 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 and I could hear push, push, push. Their touches resonated in their sound. I've been given the code on how much longer I have to be with you. Oh, and it won't be long. I know I'm so sad because I have so much enjoyed painting with you. By the way, I'm way up here, so therefore the angle, the perspective angle is going to be quite acute. See how I can pull that down? Really, and I might do something across, straight, 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 and then down, down, down. And it's the tension, not just the tension of the colors, but the tension of the different shapes, one against the other. There's that color contrast, complementary color contrast. And of course, that's how you get people to pay attention with signs. And by the way, if I want to make it brighter, maybe this would work. We'll find out. See how that yellow turns into a neon yellow right there? I don't want to share the same top, so I'm going to go up a little higher. And that way it transitions from one color into something lighter. And that makes it some... Now I'm looking over here and I'm thinking, you know, you should have something else go, a vertical come down that is a little more strong. And there, something else. See a bigger vertical. Come on, downtown, where all the lights are bright. Now, if you're my vintage, you of course know what that's from. Downtown. A favorite song of mine when I was young. Yes. What would Petula Clark say now? Okay, here we go. A little crosswalk, just little evidence of activity, which gives you a sense of surface. And all I'm doing is borrowing that Brunelleschi design pattern and I'm overlapping it. All these patterns are overlapping, but they're all converging to that vanishing point that's way back here. And back, finally. I've been so frantic, I've been throwing brushes on the floor and they've been jumping around. And unfortunately, they don't jump back up into my hand. And let's go back down with one more brighter. More bright lights back there. And at an angle. And sharpen an edge next to a dark so that it jumps out. And if I can't make it too big, because if I make it too big, it doesn't snap. So I'm going to put in some darker darks right back in here. Some other, because they're not dark, but they're just a little bit darker to make the lights really bright. So those pinks, just as this transitions from this to a lighter, they're transitioning into that light. So that the very bright light of the city seems to be more consolidated here. We can have the anomalies. Now we're down to the last, how long do we have, Connie? 30 seconds. 30 seconds. A minute. I'm going to take the tape off of this. A minute. That's not much time. This has been a beautiful affair painting with you here. I've enjoyed it so much. I'm isolating the image in space, which helps you build a better window in space, because once it's isolated, you get a better window. And you get an idea how we transcended time. We crossed time and culture, and we borrowed the colors and the ideas of the cultural ideas of the color. We borrowed the ideas of the form, and how we organize space and color in our mind. I'm really glad you could be with me. And of course, I'm David Dunlop, and I've been known to say before, I'm a landscape painter.